Sure. I came out of a healthcare environment in the sense that both my father was a physician and my mother was a nurse. So I've been in the healthcare environment all of my life. I decided as almost a prelude of going to medical school to go into pharmacy, which is how I got my start in the healthcare environment. And went to school there and realized that I actually enjoyed it and decided as an offspring of that pharmacy background to go into the business side. And so I actually got my start as I was finishing my doctoral degree at the University of Missouri in Kansas City and worked with a very entrepreneurial company called Marion Laboratories, which was actually started by a gentleman called Ewan Kaufman, who is now known for the funding of the Kauffman Foundation, which is really a focus on entrepreneurship. And so I've now spent over 30 years of my life in the healthcare business, principally in the pharmaceutical side of the business, and have enjoyed every minute of it. Our company is called ISTA Pharmaceuticals. We are a pharmaceutical company with a primary focus on developing and marketing ophthalmic medications. We've been in business since 1992. We went public in the United States on the NASDAQ in the year 2000, and then we revitalized the company, and I came in 2001 to basically take the company from what was then a one-product development stage company to a full-fledged pharmaceutical company with a focus on ophthalmology. We currently have 3 products out in the marketplace that we market through our own sales organization, and we also have 6 additional products in our pipeline that are all late-stage pharmaceutical products. We expect that over the next few years, we'll be launching anywhere from 1 to 2 products each of the about every 12 to 18 months. The organization's mission statement is to develop and market unique and uniquely improved pharmaceutical products. Our basic core philosophy in terms of new products is pretty simple. We either have to do something for the patient that's never been done before or do it better than it's been done before. And we think that that simple metric allows us to develop and market very successful products. Well, believe it or not, our competitive advantage is our size in that we're smaller than our competition. A lot of the industry giants in our space, in the ophthalmology sector, are companies like Allergan, Alcon, Novartis, through one of their divisions based here in the U.S., Bausch & Lomb, etc. And so because those companies are so large, we're able to take advantage of market segments where they simply said, the product may be too small. Now for us, a $25 to $50 million product actually can make our company. For them, it may not be something that they're willing to develop. What's interesting is the majority of the products in the ophthalmic space in pharmaceuticals are in that $25 to $50 million range. And so we think that there's plenty of advantages for us and plenty of opportunities for us to take those products out into the marketplace and be very, very successful. Our challenge is simply to get them out the door as quickly as possible. And once there, then we do have to go up against the giants in the field. We have to have a very effective and very successful sales and marketing operation, which we have built over the last 2 to 3 years. Well, taking a startup and making it successful sometimes has a significant degree of luck. You have to be in the right space in the right time, and hopefully you're presented with enough opportunities and you make the right choice. Having a focus is probably one of the primary assets that one has to have. And obviously, especially here in the United States, access to capital, to the financial markets, and having extensive knowledge of that space. Once established, while you still have to have the focus and still have to have the financial wherewithal to be successful, then more of the operating side comes into play. And that's one of the things that I've been very, very fortunate in doing, is surrounding myself with folks whose primary expertise is the operations side of the business, whether it's truly the manufacturing side, the research and development, or the sales and marketing side. I'd go back to the focus. When one takes over a company, it's clearly that somebody else is screwed up. or somehow or other hasn't figured out sort of what the magic ingredient is to make this or that particular company successful. Because I'm coming in having the knowledge of what hasn't worked for them. I'm able to focus pretty quickly and be able to get some people involved that I think can make a difference and move the company forward. Now, while we've been successful as a team in moving this company forward, as well as a couple of other ones that I've been involved with, it isn't always that easy, and we always haven't been successful. There are times where the markets just run by us and our technology isn't appropriate, or there's just simply no way of financing some of the ventures. And so in those cases, obviously then trying to get as much money back for our investors as possible by the sale of assets, et cetera, becomes the critical component of success. Well, in terms of my career, it's been learning the financial markets. The rest of it, the operating side of the business, was pretty straightforward. I was very, very fortunate in going to the right schools, and in my first company, Marion Laboratories, I spent probably 18 years of my life being trained to be a CEO. Jumped through a number of different parts of the organization, and was able to gain invaluable experiences before I was tapped to run one of our subsidiaries. In essence, that was my first CEO gig when I was running a company in Canada. And so that portion of it was pretty straightforward. I think the biggest challenge has been knowing how to go raise money. And in the U.S., that's always not easy. You have everything from the venture capital side of the business to the mezzanine players to then the public markets, and trying to sort through all the different financial structures that are currently available in order to finance a company, and do so in a way that will allow the shareholders to get a fair return is critical, because obviously when I do these things, I'm looking at it not from the perspective or only the perspective of the company that I'm running, but I'm also looking at it from the perspective of companies that I may run in the future. So it's very, very important in order for me to be personally successful to make sure that the shareholders get their fair return. Always. I have, probably since 1997, have been raising money pretty much every year since then. And it's been everything from venture capital money for startups to or to even angel money to get a couple of small companies off the ground, all the way to taking companies public, as well as doing subsequent financings for public companies. It's never easy. It's always, folks are willing to give you more than enough money when you don't need it. And so it's always a challenge in terms of from a timing point of view, and also the kind of financing that one wants to do. No, I don't think there are any secrets for obtaining angel money. I think that it's really just good ideas and being able to sell those ideas and do so with a passion. Most of the folks that provide angel financing have been quite successful in their own right, and so they know or believe that they can pick the winners and believe they can pick those folks who, like them, have the necessary traits in order to be successful. One of the things that I'm always reminded of was my first interview with a gentleman by the name of Pierre Lamond, who's one of the senior partners at Sequoia Ventures in Menlo Park. And that the first time he and I ever met, before he even said hello, the very, very first thing he said to me was, "So, young man, how are you and my money going to make me more money?" And I think if you remember that, then I think one has a pretty good idea of what it's going to take to be successful in raising angel money. Well, one of the biggest challenges that every entrepreneur faces is, do they use venture money, do they use angel money, et cetera. The venture funds, for the most part, have been quite successful in helping many, many organizations in a number of different fields get off the ground, and are able to help them not only with financing, but also in terms of providing adequate resources and sometimes just consulting help or just their own expertise. Many companies, or many venture companies, actually have guys on staff who have been quite successful entrepreneurs in their own right. And so picking the right one, making sure that they're ideas are aligned with that of the entrepreneur is critical one to success. For me, I manage by feel. And so for me, it's getting to know the people in the organization. I take great pride in getting to know everybody that works for our company, in our current company. And really, my wife and I have been doing this since 1987 when I got my first CEO gig. We actually have the folks from the company come to our house for dinner when they're first employed. And that goes from everybody from the janitors all the way up to the vice president of the company. And so we get the opportunity to get to meet the folks and understand who they are. They get to see us and understand who we are. And so getting to know the people, getting to get them aligned to our vision, getting them to understand my management style, for me, has always been the easiest. Well, probably like everybody else, my background. And so I was born in Cuba. My father and my mother took us out of there shortly after Castro took over. And so the idea of taking risks and starting over was not foreign to me, because my dad certainly was a very, very successful physician in Cuba, had the largest clinical laboratory there, and he left it all to take us out of there and start a new life. So taking the risk part has always been quite influential. Having been exposed, in addition to that, to two incredibly successful entrepreneurs in my life. The first one I mentioned already, which was Ewing Kauffman at Marion Laboratories, who became a multi-billionaire back in the 70s and the 80s. He built a company from scratch, much like I'm doing, and he actually believed in sharing the results. And so everybody who produced was able to get a piece of the action in that company. So he spawned quite a few entrepreneurs coming out of that organization. The second one was more local here to Southern California, was getting exposed to Gavin Herbert, who was the original founder of Allergan. And what's interesting is now that I've come back into the ophthalmology community, I'm now a direct competitor for Gavin, and I'm basically doing many of the things he taught me how to do. And he acknowledges the fact that what we're doing is not rocket science, and it's basically what he did to build Allergan to the success that it is today, but that they can no longer do that because their company's just simply too large. They have too many processes, and when you have that many people, it certainly makes an awful lot of sense. Their focus is now not just ophthalmology, but primarily the dermatology and the cosmetic side of the business. And so for us, it's having a pure focus in ophthalmology makes it considerably easier. Well, for me, it's pretty straightforward. I stay fairly focused on only those things that can make a huge difference in our company, and not everything can. And so there's only a handful of things that I need to do well each and every year for the company to continue to be successful, whether it's one year making sure that we have enough products, next year maybe financing, third year maybe building the sales force. And so I typically stay fairly focused only on those things where I myself can make a difference. We have a lot of folks who've had a lot of experience in running their own particular sides of the business, and certainly I'm always available for counseling. But in terms of where I spend my time is very focused, and so I never have time issues. And I'm just happy that I've got so many talented people around me that are so experienced. We've all worked together before, and in this company we've now been working together for about 5 years, and so there aren't very many surprises. And so I focus only on those things where I know that I can make a huge difference. Everything else, they're handling it, and they're handling that very well. And so whether it's the emails or the memos, although we don't have very many of those running around anymore, I make a point of only touching those things once, and I always ask myself the same question, which is, if I do something about what's in this email or in this memo, am I going to change the course of the company? And if the answer is no, then that's the last time I touch it. Obviously, the primary issue there is getting to know what the customer wants in the first place. And there's nothing more valuable, and I spend an awful lot of time doing this, and getting out and visiting with the customers on a pretty regular basis. I spend probably 2.5 to 3 months every year doing nothing but road trips with our sales force. And so I'll go out in various parts of the country, actually spend a day with the sales team or with their local sales representative, visiting their 8 to 10 doctors that they see every day, perhaps going out to dinner with 2 or 3 local influential physicians that could actually have a pretty good size impact on new products that we may provide, et cetera. And so I spend quite a bit of face time directly with the customers, and hopefully that allows us then to align the company's resources to their needs. I think it's twofold. Number one, it's a great background to have for 2 major areas for us, the sales and marketing side of the business as well as the financial side of the business. A lot of folks in the pharmaceutical industry traditionally come up through the sales ranks. And so as we try to promote from within, and we've been quite successful in doing so, we try to get as many of these folks extra learnings, if you will. So we give them as many different experiences as we possibly can. But what we find is that we can only take that to a certain point. And so some of the core skills and the way of thinking that many folks learn out of their MBA programs becomes critical in sort of taking the next step, whether it's looking at being a product manager or is looking at being one of the chief financial folks in the organization. Having a much broader understanding of the business environment certainly makes it a lot easier to develop those folks and move them up the line quite quickly. Oh, that's easy. It's walking around. I spend very little time in meetings, and any given day I bet I probably don't have more than an hour or so dedicated to meetings per day. I think my longest meeting is actually 2 hours, which are broken up every Friday. One is just 1 hour staff meeting, and 1 hour is basically a project or program review. And those are my 2 longest meetings. The rest of the time I'm spending walking around. One of the things that's different about our organization is that I know everybody who has the ultimate responsibilities to make a project work. And so we built the organization to limit the number of committees. We want to know exactly who the project leader is, and they have the responsibility of moving the projects through, all the way through to whatever their defined endpoint is. And likewise out in the sales force, we have specific sales representatives that are dedicated to a particular piece of geography or a particular zip code. So we know exactly whose success or lack thereof we can attribute to that territory. And so for me, the biggest thing is just simply walking around or calling the sales reps on the phone when they first come into the organization or when they've had a particularly successful week that we find out about, and then having them share with me what they're doing. Well, the good news is we have what are called now pharma guidelines, and so that has certainly limited the number of requests that I get that are unusual. Back in my early days, I'd say probably the biggest request that we got when I was in the international side of the business was always discount pricing, et cetera, well beyond what our limits were. But I never really got any truly what I would call off the wall or crazy requests that I was worried about getting sent to jail for. Well, over the years, it's been a little bit different. When I first got started and had a family at home, it was the biggest thing that I could do was either spending time with the kids or actually spending a lot of time playing golf. That was my big thing as I got started in the industry and started working, and certainly found it to be not only relaxing, but allowed me to forge pretty good friendships, spending 4 and 5 hours out on the golf course. More recently, over the last half a dozen years, especially since I've lived here in California, I've gotten involved in 2 other activities which also are quite relaxing for me. I do have a fishing boat that I take out all the way down into Mexican waters and fish about anywhere from 50 to 100 miles off the coast. And when you're out there by yourself, there's no cell phones out there, thank God. And so I'm able to relax quite a bit. And then over the last 9 years or so, I learned how to fly airplanes. And so now I have my own airplane, and I fly across the country on a pretty regular basis. It allows me to visit with customers on a pretty regular basis, allows me to visit our sales force wherever it is that they may be living, and it's pretty convenient because I'm the one that's doing the flying, and so it also is quite relaxing. Well, I think all of us grew up reading Drucker, and so just about anything he wrote, I think, has had quite a bit of influence in my life. But probably the book that has been the most fascinating for me, that I have found particularly useful as I have gotten involved in smaller companies, is The Art of War. Because I find that, especially as I'm going up against companies that are considerably larger with more resources than the ones that I'm currently running, that having some of those basic principles come to life in the workplace or in the commercial workplace certainly have helped me forge some strategies and really understand some of the actions on the other side a little bit easier. So I read Sun Tzu's Art of War about every 3 or 4 years, just as a reminder of how things should be. Well, two of them. One is regardless of whether you're the large guy in a block or the smallest guy in the block, you just can't underestimate anybody. And so, because you may think you've done all your homework, but at the end of the day, you really have to understand an awful lot about them that sometimes we just don't go deep enough. And so, I think understanding the enemy, as he put it, I think is invaluable for a small company. Easily the most important one was we never go head up against them. We always come at them from the side. We always try to do the guerrilla or the sneak attacks, and that has been very valuable, has allowed us to gain considerable market share. In fact, when you stop and think about it, just that strategy alone is what built my current company, because we basically took advantage of the fact that they were going after the massive markets in ophthalmology, leaving behind what for them were the smaller ones. So I went around the side and got involved in a number of different categories where they just weren't spending a lot of time and energy. Got our products in there, and now in the marketplace, we are unfortunately having to go head up against some of these guys, but at the same time, we now have the talent out in the sales and marketing organization that allows us to do that. Well, from a business point of view, I accomplished it quite a while ago. And when I first started out in business back when I was in my early 20s, I decided that I wanted to be a CEO of a company, and I wanted to have a certain amount of money in the bank. And so I accomplished the CEO part when I was 37. That was back when I was running the Canadian operations, which really wasn't a subsidiary of Marion Laboratories. It was a half-owned company. Marion Laboratories owned 50%, and there was 2 outside shareholders. And so that was my first CEO opportunity, and it was in Canada. It was running about a company that was just shy of a couple $100 million in revenues, had about 500 people, and it was very, very profitable. And so I got for the first time to see what that was like. And so from a money point of view, I was fortunate enough that Marion Laboratories, the first company that I went to work with, believed in those who produce share in the results. And so a lot of our compensation was stock options. And when we were bought out in 1991 by Dow Chemical, the company had about 2,000 or 3,000 people. About 800 of them were millionaires. And so it allowed me to achieve my goals at a pretty early age. Now my major goal in life is just simply to have fun. All my kids are grown up, and it's just tremendous to watch them as they embark in their own careers. But for my wife and I, the biggest thing is I only do those things that I really enjoy doing. And if I find myself having more bad days than good, then I find something else to do. From a personal point of view, it's watching my 3 kids grow up. There's nothing that compares to that. While I've been very fortunate on the business side of having successful product launches, taking companies public and watching those things grow, selling them for pretty healthy returns to investors, and certainly all those were great achievements, there's nothing more important to me than the family side of it. And now that all my kids are in their early to mid-20s, it's just watching them grow up. It's just great. Probably not. I've been always a believer that you don't look back. And so I've looked at my career a number of different times and have really not spent a whole lot of time saying, gosh, I really missed that opportunity, because I always believe there's another one right around the corner. And so there's very little that I would go back and do. Well, they'd be a little bit different depending on whether they were going to start their own company or whether they wanted to have a career in management. The career in management, I would encourage people to get as broad-based experiences as possible. I think one of the challenges, especially, well, it goes back to my own generation, everybody wanted to go straight up the line and get promoted as quickly as possible to get up to the vice president or manager levels, director level, VP level, etc. And many times when they got up there, then they realized that they didn't have a broad enough experience to get the biggest job of all, which is a CEO job. And so those folks who ended up getting those CEO gigs were the ones that took risks in their career. They were the ones that said, all right, so I've done this over here, now I want to get another experience over here. I'm going to take a special project and start a new organization over in Europe or in Japan, or took those kinds of assignments, but they got a broad-based experience. And so somebody going into management, I would certainly encourage them to do that. For somebody that is starting a company, I would encourage them to make sure that they have truly understood what the market dynamics are, understood what the opportunity is for the product or service that they're going to be taking in there, understand who's going to be buying that product and service, and really get that right. Because the rest of it really just it comes pretty easy. You can buy the talent to help you set up the infrastructure. You can buy the talent to set up all the other pieces of the organization. But if you don't put that product or that service exactly where that next wave's coming, you're going to miss it totally. And so that's what is, I think, required to be successful in starting a company.